further demonize biblical values by establishing a private right of action against organizations who believe in natural marriage, opening the floodgates for predatory lawsuits against people of faith. The bill's only purpose is to hand the federal government a legal bludgeoning tool to drive people of faith out of the public square and to silence anyone who dissents. Sadly, the Senate rejected 3 amendments that would have eliminated the private right of action and prevented the government from infringing on the freedom of religion. Instead, a flimsy amendment that includes vague language unlikely to protect anyone was included. Unfortunately, and likely intentionally, this hollow amendment provides no tangible protections for religious schools, no protections for faith-based adoption and foster care agencies, no protections for Christian businesses who contract with the government, and no protections for civil servants that justly believe marriage is just between a man and a woman. The bill's implications: submit to our ideology or be silenced. This is yet another step toward the Democrats' goal of dismantling the traditional family, silencing voices of faith, and permanently undoing our country's God-woven foundation. This is the Democrats' priority. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you my priority. Protect religious liberty, protect people of faith, and protect Americans who believe in the true meaning of marriage. I hope and pray that my colleagues will find the courage to join me in opposing this misguided and this dangerous bill. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Allred.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to say that we received amazing news this morning. Brittany Griner is coming home. This is a huge relief for her, her wife Sherelle, her family, and after months of uncertainty in Russia's sham justice system. And I want to thank President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and all at the State Department who made this happen. And today, in a strong symbol of the stark differences in the freedoms between our two nations, the U.S. Congress will vote in a bipartisan way to pass the Respect for Marriage Act, enshrining marriage equality into federal law and protecting marriages just like Brittany's. I'm proud to vote today to say that love is love, no matter who you are, where you live, and no matter what any future, extreme, out-of-touch Supreme Court may say. And I urge all of my colleagues to join me in voting yes and standing up for freedom. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would yield 3 minutes to my friend and colleague, Mr. Good from the great state of Virginia.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you to my colleague from Ohio, Chairman Jordan. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the so-called Respect for Marriage Act. Honestly, the bill should be called the Disrespect for Marriage Act. This bill certainly disrespects God's definition of marriage, a definition that has served his creation well for more than 5,000 years of recorded history. And his definition is the only one that really matters. This bill would codify into federal law the Supreme Court's wrongly decided Obergefell decision and ensure that the marriage laws in the most liberal state, irrespective of how radical they might become in the future, think polygamy, bestiality, child marriage, or whatever, must be legally recognized in all states. It was wrong when the Supreme Court made law in the Obergefell decision requiring that the marriage law in Massachusetts had to become the law of the whole country when Massachusetts approved gay marriage. This was overriding the will of the people and their elected representatives, as no other state to that point had been able to pass through referendum or state legislature a gay marriage law. The fact is, traditional biblical marriage is the foundation of a strong society and a strong culture. I'll say it once again. Almost everything that plagues our society is a failure to follow God's design for marriage, morality, and the family. The perfect, omniscient, immutable God knows what he's doing. But this legislation repeals the correct definition of marriage in federal code and requires the federal government to recognize any marriage if the marriage was valid in the state where it was performed, and perhaps even worse, this bill eliminates all religious freedom protections for churches or faith-based organizations and requires everyone to participate in and recognize gay marriage. And it empowers the IRS with their newly hired 87,000 agents, who apparently need more to do, to go after the religious institutions that simply seek to operate according to their beliefs. In fact, the bill does nothing to prevent the IRS from attacking and harming the religious organizations that have made an incredible impact in our communities across our nation. It's simply designed to undermine marriage as the union between one man and one woman. God's perfect design is indeed marriage between one man and one woman for life. And it doesn't matter what you think or what I think. That's what the Bible says. This proposal is yet another Democrat attempt to undermine the fundamental values which formed our nation and continue to hold our country together. Recognition of the institution of marriage as between one man and one woman, and respect for the freedom to operate according to your sincerely held religious beliefs. The legislation we're continuing today is a sobering indication of the erosion of the moral values that have made this nation great. As President Reagan once said, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. All great nations and societies fall from within. With Democrats threatening all sense of values and decency and family today, sexualizing kids in school, redefining sex and gender, trans surgery and mutilation of minors, it makes no sense for any Republican to support their efforts to codify their views on marriage. And I urge all my colleagues in this body to join me in strongly opposing this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's never too late to do the right thing. Thanks to bipartisan work in the Senate, the Respect for Marriage Act comes back to the House with added language that should allay anyone's fears or misunderstandings, yet still ensure we can legally recognize marriage as is currently recognized in this country. It would be wrong to say that my husband Phil and I have a marriage that is any different than anyone else's marriage here in this body. My workplace health insurance should extend to my husband just like yours extends to your spouse. I should be able to visit my husband in the hospital if need be, just like you can visit your spouse. My earned benefits for retirement and Social Security, our property rights, our benefits through our taxes, and so much more should be no different regardless of if your spouse is named Samuel or Samantha. That's what we will do today. With the revised Respect for Marriage Act, denying legal recognition to any legally married couple would be so far out of the mainstream that it would actually be discrimination. And I'm sure no one here would intend to discriminate against me and my spouse, as I would never against you and yours. I urge everyone's support for this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
The
How much? Revise that. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Respect for Marriage Act. Over my time in Congress as the first openly gay member of color elected in history, the fight for LGBTQ equality has remained a critical and personal focus of mine. Last week, the Senate took long overdue action to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, and when my colleagues and I pass the Respect for Marriage Act in the House today, it will mean the world to me, my loved ones, and to millions of Americans. Nearly 10 years ago, at the start of my career in Congress, the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell versus Hodges that marriage equality is a fundamental protected right. We took to the streets in fervent celebration of this cornerstone victory for our community. This bill will pass today, but it is a reminder of the necessity of our vigilance in the fight for human rights and the need to hold the judicial branch accountable. We must rise to the challenge, and we will prevail. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 2 minutes to my friend and colleague from the great state of Michigan.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to what I believe is the inappropriately named Respect for Marriage Act. Because if what my colleagues have just said were actually all that was here, it would be a different story to some degree, but that's not what we're talking about. The bill betrays our country's commitment to the fundamental right of religious liberty by depriving religious and faith-based organizations of their tax-exempt status and depriving individual people of faith of being able to carry out fully their faith without repercussions. Licenses, government contracts are also put at risk here with this legislation. As a result, religiously affiliated and faith-based organizations will be at risk of being compelled to make hiring decisions in contradiction to their tenets. And I'm not just talking about Christian religions. We're talking about all that are impacted by this. It puts us at risk for Catholic Charities' ability to find foster and adoptive homes for children in need. Gospel Rescue Mission's ability to serve the homeless, and it would likely be the end of the school choice initiatives that rely on religious schools, schools of faith, to serve at-risk children trapped in failing schools. Additionally, business owners across the country who conduct their businesses based on their sincerely held faith beliefs and principles will be subject to lawsuits simply because they have a traditional view of marriage. Again, if all that my colleagues have just even recently said were the only thing about this legislation, it'd be another story, but it isn't. It goes way beyond. And a deep appreciation for and commitment to following science also in the positive endeavor of
the gentleman's time has
continuing
expired.
the human race is important.
Okay.
I think I've made my statement, and I appreciate that, but I yield back and ask for opposition to this legislation and a more thoughtful approach.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Craig.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, my wife Cheryl and I were married 14 years ago when one of the first states in our country allowed us to do so. It took years and a Supreme Court ruling to acknowledge and grant the legal protections that come with marriage across this great land. In the ensuing years, we raised our 4 sons, and we expanded our family of 6 to 9, adding 2 daughter-in-laws and a grandson to that mix. I'm standing here today because in the year 2022, families like mine are once again concerned that an activist, out-of-step Supreme Court is going to take those rights away. And just so we're clear, that Supreme Court and the members in opposition of this legislation today are out of step with the American people. Today, I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on the Respect for Marriage Act, a bill that takes the long-standing overdue step of repealing DOMA and ensures that same-sex and interracial marriage is recognized in every state, no matter who is sitting on the Supreme Court. We've made progress. Let's not go back, America. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just first say the previous speaker talked about being out of step with the American people. Are you kidding me? The Democrats are the party who think men can use women's restrooms. The Democrats are the party who think boys can participate in girls' sports. The Democrats are the party that think you can take the life of an unborn child right up until their birthday. And the Democrats are the party who actually had a witness in committee say that she thought men could get pregnant. And we're the ones who are out of step with, I mean, you got to be kidding me. I would yield 2 minutes to my friend from the great state of Florida, Mr. Mass.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. What is our job here? Our job, we're going to take an oath in a couple of weeks here, really outlining our job, supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I took that oath as a member of the military. I've taken that oath numerous times as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. The U.S. House of Representatives, bicameral body, 435 of us, meant to do the work of protecting we, the people of the United States of America, who elect us. And I want to quote our colleague on the other side, Ms. Scanlon, who was talking about what we don't have time for here, as our colleague Chip Roy was asking for amendments to ensure that we, the people's religious freedom was not prohibited, that the free exercise thereof was not prohibited. Adopting an amendment by our colleague Chip Roy, she said, would unsettle the Senate. God forbid the work that we do here in the House of Representatives unsettle the work that's done in the Senate. Our job must be to just do their bidding of what they decide in the Senate and not represent as one of 435. But no, that's not the real case. Our job is to represent our constituents, we the people, not to worry about whether we unsettle or don't unsettle the Senate. Let me give you another quote from our colleague about why we don't have the time to prohibit or to prevent prohibiting the free exercise thereof. She said, "This Congress is coming to a close, and we don't have the time to make changes to this legislation." We don't have the time? Wait a second. The U.S. House of Representatives, our oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. It's our singular job here. And we don't have the time to do it? That's what your side is telling us. We don't have time to make changes to the bill to ensure that the free exercise thereof, of our people's religions, is not infringed upon. And you're saying we don't have the time. What the hell are we doing
time
here
has
if we
expired.
don't have the time to do it? What the hell are we doing?
The gentleman from Ohio is reserved. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, a member of the committee, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Why are we here this morning? We're here because dignity should be part of life in America. We're here because the founding fathers, imperfect as they were, said we are here to create a more perfect union. And we're specifically here because a justice on the United States Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas, appallingly stated that other cherished fundamental rights should be subject to the abrogation and the writing. In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. It is shameful that we would have to be here today, but I proudly stand with my community, those who understand and recognize that it is crucial for the Respect for Marriage Act to pass so that respect can go for the loving relationships, the families, the daughters, the sons, the aunts and uncles, the husbands and wives, the husbands, and all and wives that come as family. Let me be very clear. I'm the only member in the Texas delegation that voted against, did not vote for the Protecting Marriage Act. And I did that. DOMA was wrong then, it is wrong now, and I continuously stand with all of you to pass H.R. 8404, Respect for Marriage. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I rise today to give my strongest support for the Respect for Marriage Act. It's hard to believe that today, in 2022, we are still fighting to protect the right for all Americans to marry the person they love. But the Supreme Court's actions this summer have shown us that we cannot take our rights for granted. No one should have to live in fear that a Supreme Court decision could invalidate their marriage in the blink of an eye. The Respect for Marriage Act enshrines the right to marry the person you love, regardless of gender, race, or identity, into federal law. It finally repeals the Discriminatory Defense of Marriage Act from our law books, and it reaffirms our commitment to a promise of equality for all by ensuring critical federal and state protections for same-sex and interracial marriages. I've spent my career fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ plus community, both at the state and federal levels, and so I'm proud to stand on the House floor today in support of the Respect for Marriage Act. Sending this bill to the President's desk sends a powerful message that love is love, that family is family, and that this Congress stands together
Gentlelady's
against
time has
hate
expired.
and discrimination.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, a member of the committee, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise today to support people's right to love and their equal protection under the law. The Respect for Marriage Act will reaffirm marriage equality as the law of the land. All Americans, no matter who they are and who they love, deserve dignity and equal treatment under the law. Madam Speaker, back home in my state of Texas, people are literally scared. Entire families are considering fleeing Texas for fear of what the MAGA GOP will do to their partners and their loved ones. Earlier this year, the far-right Texas GOP declared homosexuality as an abnormal lifestyle choice in their official platform. Yes, they put it in their platform. Last month, Texas Republicans have now pre-filed 17 bills targeting the LGBTQ plus community for our next legislative session in Texas. To my LGBTQ constituents and neighbors back home, know that I am here for you. House Democrats will not waver in our fight for human dignity and equality under the law. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Pappas.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of the Respect for Marriage Act. Growing up in New Hampshire as a gay person, I wasn't sure if there would be a place for me or if I'd be able to have a family of my own. But I was lucky to be surrounded by people who embraced me for who I am, and to live at a time when hearts, minds, and laws were changing for the better. Next year, I'll marry the love of my life. And it's unthinkable that if the Supreme Court heeds Justice Thomas's call, that our marriage might not be recognized in New Hampshire where we live, but not across the country. That's the reality that many couples fear, one that would jeopardize their ability to visit a spouse in the hospital or access all the benefits that couples do, one that would strip millions of Americans of their rights and their dignity. That's a threat that we can't ignore. So I hope my colleagues will heed the calls of their constituents and the call of history and cast a vote in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act to say that love is love and to respect people's individual freedoms in this country. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 8404, the Respect for Marriage Act, a bill to ensure critical protections for same-sex and interracial marriages. 19 days ago, Coloradans woke up to the news of yet another mass shooting impacting our community. This violence was the direct result of intolerance and discrimination. It was the direct result of efforts by some elected officials to seize on hate and villainize the LGBTQ plus community. Today, we have the opportunity to reject the ugly vitriol and to stand with the LGBTQ plus community in Colorado and nationwide. Today, we have the opportunity to protect all Americans, regardless of how they identify or whom they love. The Respect for Marriage Act will uphold marriage equality under federal law, repealing the Discriminatory Defense of Marriage Act. This bill ensures that the federal government won't stand in the way of a person's right to marry whom they love. I thank Chairman Nadler for leading this effort and the Congressional Equality Caucus for their ongoing work to promote equality for all, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I dedicate my remarks to two civil rights icons, Edith and Judith Windsor. Today, we repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, which degraded marriage under the pretense of defending it. Today, we put the equality of same-sex love in its rightful place, under the protection of federal law. We will not leave it to the forces of hate and the relics of the past to be the final word on the fate of love. We in the LGBTQ community will be the arbiters of our own legal equality, and the authors of our own marital destiny. Our equal right to marry the people that we love, in the country that we love, with the pride that we love. Today, that right makes America a more perfect union. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I rise in support and for the Respect for Marriage Act. In all my decades of public service, I have never wavered in my support for the LGBTQ plus community. In 1990, I introduced the first legislation in New York State history to grant legal recognition to same-sex couples. And when the Defense for Marriage Act was introduced in 1996, I was one of 67 House members to vote against it. I knew then what I know now. DOMA was a bigoted, discriminatory solution to a problem that never existed. It never made sense that I or anyone in this body or in this country could get in a cab and marry the cab driver that same day or some stranger on the street. But a bold, brave New Yorker and a friend of mine named Edie Windsor could not have her marriage recognized. She sued, she won in court. Today, this law will codify her court case. I dedicate my remarks to her and thank her for her lifelong commitment to LGBTQ rights and equality. I urge my
Gentlewoman's time
friends
has
on
expired.
both sides of the aisle to support this bill.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized, and the gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the Respect for Marriage Act because every American deserves to have their union recognized and respected in law. Since the Obergefell and Loving decisions, millions of families rely on the constitutional guarantee that marriage equality affords. Yet we just saw what happens when half our population relies on this high court to protect our sacred rights. Recent far-right court nominees broke their pledges to respect the precedent of Roe, and look at the legal chaos, unequal treatment, and financial and physical ruin that they have unleashed. We can no more rely on their word than we can their apologists who say these legal extremists will uphold marriage equality. This bill ensures that by guaranteeing that same-sex and interracial couples have a legal right to build a life with someone who shares their love. I'm honored to stand with the LGBTQ plus community to make this a more just, equal, and perfect union. Without these rights and this legislation, America can never truly aspire to that. I remind all my colleagues that history is watching, and I urge you to vote yea on this Senate amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Peters.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to support the Respect for Marriage Act. Today we celebrate equality, fairness, and love. Since the Supreme Court's ruling in Obergefell, all loving couples have had a right to marry across our country. However, if the Supreme Court won't protect Americans, especially in light of the repeal of Roe, we in Congress must do everything in our power to defend those freedoms. The Respect for Marriage Act ensures federal marriage equality by guaranteeing the federal rights, benefits, and obligations of marriages. Today's legislation provides certainty for those couples and all future couples that the federal government will continue to recognize their marriages no matter where they live or who they're married to. I'm proud to support this historic bill alongside members of both parties to protect the rights of San Diegans and Americans across the country. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today on behalf of marriage equality. The bills we write and pass regularly affect millions of lives. Rarely is the legislation we vote on so personal as the bill we're voting on today, the Respect for Marriage Act. My daughter and her wife are two of the estimated 26 million Americans whose freedom to marry will be protected by this bill. Their son, my 1-year-old grandson, Reza, can now grow up without risk to his family. Love is a precious thing. I know my daughters will now know our nation respects their marriage. You cannot legislate love, but you can give love the protection of our laws. And I thank you and urge my colleagues to vote for this. And I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in solidarity with our LGBTQ+ community who have fought for equal dignity under the law for decades. For far too long, our LGBTQ neighbors have been discriminated against simply for being who they are and loving who they love. Today, if that case is overturned, same-sex couples would not be allowed to marry in the state of Michigan. Every single American, no matter their faith, race, gender identity, or sexual orientation, has the right to marry the person they love. I am proud to be here today in the People's House of Congress in taking this historic vote to send this legislation to President Biden's desk. Today, we take one more step towards equality and justice for all. May we continue to build upon this progress by ensuring that our LGBTQ+ neighbors have what they need to thrive and be protected under law. Thank you, and I yield.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, a member of the committee and the soon-to-be Democratic leader, Mr. Jeffries.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank the distinguished chair for yielding and for his leadership. The founding document of this country, the Declaration of Independence, read, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words were eloquent in their articulation, incomplete in their application. As the great Barbara Jordan once pointed out, initially they didn't apply to enslaved Africans or women, Native Americans, poor people of every race, and certainly it didn't apply to the LGBTQ community. But through a process of constitutional amendment, ratification, court decision, and legislation, those words have increasingly been brought to life as we journey toward a more perfect union. That is the work that is being done today with the Respect for Marriage Act, particularly because of a radical right-wing, reckless and regressive Supreme Court majority that threatens freedom and marriage equality. That is why I urge my colleagues to support the Respect for Marriage Act. Respect marriage, respect freedom, respect liberty and justice for all. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, a member of the committee, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong and joyful support of the Respect for Marriage Act. As the mother of an incredible trans daughter, I'm here to fight for her rights and those of all LGBTQ people who for too long have been denied the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And as someone who is myself in an interracial marriage, it is far past time that we codify those rights. An extremist Supreme Court, hateful state legislatures want to roll back the hard-won progress that we have made, but we are here to say in a bipartisan way, we will not tolerate this. We will codify these rights once and for all. This is the beginning. I also call on the Senate to pass the Equality Act to ensure that LGBTQ+ people can enjoy the same rights as everyone else in the country. But today, Madam Speaker, let's get this bill done. Vote yes on codifying the right to marry the one you love. Vote yes on the Respect for Marriage Act.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Majority Leader of the House, The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I'm going to miss this 1 minute, let me tell you that. This bill was passed with a very bipartisan vote in this House this past July. And I rise in strong support of the Respect for Marriage Act, which this bill has been slightly amended and sent to us. Like many Americans across the country, I was sickened, deeply sorry by the violent attack on an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs just a few weeks ago. It was a manifestation of hate, a manifestation of prejudice, a manifestation of bigotry, a manifestation of thinking one is better than the other, that somehow we are not all equal in the eyes of our Constitution and in the eyes of God. It was a somber reminder of how safe spaces still are not safe for so many. One of the Club Q survivors, a young man named Anthony, said that as he lay wounded on the floor, his first thought, not unsurprisingly, which he believed may be his last thought, was of his husband of 14 years, Jeremy. What the justices said some years ago, what we have said in our legislation, is that who you love is your choice. One of the first votes I cast in the Maryland State Senate in 1967 was the repeal of the miscegenation statutes. The Supreme Court that same year had ruled that unconstitutional. That because a black male wanted to marry a white woman, or a white woman wanted to marry a black male, or an Asian, or of some other ethnicity or race, that somehow we would interpose our own judgment. Denying that all people are created equal and endowed by their Creator, not by us, not by the Constitution, by their Creator, with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Certainly pursuit of happiness means that you can love whom you choose. The love that Anthony felt for his husband in that moment reflected a basic emotional instinct that makes us all human. Madam Speaker, I rise today for the millions of people like Anthony and Jeremy who deserve to continue living proudly and happily and safely in same-sex and interracial marriages. In doing so, I stand for all Americans who cherish the liberty, equality, and justice promised to them under our Constitution. Last summer, the Supreme Court, largely the Republican faction of the Supreme Court, they will resent that phrase, I'm sure, violated that sacred promise with their radical ruling in Dobbs versus Jackson, breaking nearly 50 years of precedent, contrary to what some of those justices said to the United States Senate their premise would be. They deprived women of their constitutional right to reproductive health care, to control of their own bodies, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. In the process, they also opened the door for future challenges to Obergefell, Hodges, United States versus Windsor, Loving versus Virginia, of course, which dealt with you couldn't marry a person of another color. The Obergefell and Windsor precedents protecting same-sex marriage have stood for 7 and 9 years, respectively. Not the half a century that the others had, but for the same proposition. It's not your business. I am shocked that conservatives who have a libertarian bent believe that somehow we ought to get involved in this. So I would urge all my colleagues to support this. I remember the most conservative member of the state Senate in which I served for 12 years, got up and talking about a woman's right to choose, said it's not my business. It's not the government's business. It's not the legislator's business. It's my business. It's her business. The loving precedent protecting interracial marriage has stood for 55 years. Justice Thomas perhaps would opine that it is not a right that is found in the Constitution. After the Supreme Court disregarded decades of precedent to overturn Roe v. Wade, we have no reason to expect it won't do the same to marriage equality. We believe that all men are created equal, and all women, and men and women together. Americans have grown accustomed to knowing that they have a constitutional right to equal marriage. Those living in same-sex and interracial marriages should not have to live with the fear that their government could rescind legal recognition of their families at any moment. That's not America. That's not content of character, as Martin Luther King urged us to pursue, character. They must be able to live confidently knowing that their marriages will be recognized wherever they go in America, no matter the city, county, or state. Our Democratic House majority knows that no state ought to be able to deny full faith and credit to legal marriage between consenting American adults. And a lot of Republicans agree with us. This is not a partisan issue. I hope it's not a partisan issue in this vote. It certainly was not a partisan issue when we passed it to the Senate. And it was not a partisan vote in the United States Senate. And we know the best way to protect that most basic right to marriage equality is to enshrine it in federal statute. That's why we took swift action last summer to pass the Respect for Marriage Act through the House, and why I'm proud to bring it to the floor again today. I want to thank Chairman Nadler. I want to thank the staff of the committee. I want to thank Representative Cicilline and all the co-chairs of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus. But this is not a caucus issue. This is a country issue. This is a constitutional issue. This is a fairness issue. This is justice for all. I want to thank Chairman Ruiz and Democratic Caucus Chairman Jeffries, who's been very involved in this bill, Chairwoman Beatty. All have worked hard on this bill. Similarly, I appreciate the House Republicans who joined us in supporting this bill, a significant number of House Republicans. I would hope all Republicans would do it on the theory this is not our business. That people are free to make their own decisions, not government make these decisions. I also want to thank the 62 senators, including 12 Republicans, who came together to advance this critical legislation. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, all 435 of us, to stand up and say this is a free country. It is a country that believes in equality for all. This is a country that the representatives of our Constitution, our Declaration, and of our laws would stand up united and saying, you are free to love who you choose. It is not our choice. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What happened in Colorado, as the gentleman referenced, was wrong as wrong could be. We all understand that. But you know what else is wrong? The 100 churches and crisis pregnancy centers that were attacked in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. Actually, when the leak happened, dozens and dozens of those attacks happened between the leak of the opinion and the opinion itself, all designed to intimidate the Supreme Court. And what did this body do? While that was happening and Supreme Court Justices Holmes were being protest, harassed, all kinds of things said about their family, an assassination attempt on one of those justices, Justice Kavanaugh, what did this body do? They waited a month to pass legislation to give our highest court members the protection they needed. This body did that. So look, There is no place for violence, but let's be clear. Let's condemn all of it. Let's do what we can to protect it, and let's not stay on this concerted effort to intimidate the court. By the way, Madam Speaker, we have yet to have a hearing on the leak of the Dobbs decision. But in an hour and 15 minutes, we are going to have a hearing on the fake leak that was brought up about Justice Alito in the Hobby Lobby case. Why can't we get to the bottom of what happened earlier this year with the Dobbs decision that resulted in all that violence, over 100 churches and crisis pregnancy centers attacked? I'd like to have a hearing on that. I hope at some point the chairman will. We will look into doing that next year when we convene the new Congress. That I reserve. I'd be happy to yield.
I just want to make clear. You indicated that we did nothing. The justices of the Supreme Court had full protection. The issue was families and the families of members. But you're not going to be on the public record.
Reclaiming my time,
and I respect
the majority leader reclaiming my time.
From Ohio
the fact is, the Senate passed the bill, and you guys waited a month before we passed it on the House floor, and you know that's accurate.
If the gentleman will continue to yield, you represented that the justices were unprotected. That is not accurate, sir.
Justices' families, exactly right. Justices' families. I will correct that. But you guys waited a month to do that when they were being threatened. That's my point. With that, I reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. You know, I've been listening to this debate on the Republican side, and it's self-contradictory. On the one hand, don't worry about it. Obergefell is not threatened. It's the law of the land. The Supreme Court has decided it. There's no threat. You guys are exaggerating the threat to Obergefell. On the other hand, this bill is catastrophic. My God, it'll change things. Well, how will it change things if Obergefell is going to keep going? This bill will threaten the institution of marriage somehow. Really? I don't think it'll threaten the institution of marriage, especially since it's irrelevant, since Obergefell is going to continue. You can't argue out of both sides of your mouth. So I'd also point out, as I will in my closing statement, that contrary to the fears expressed about religious liberty, almost every church group in the United States has endorsed this bill. I'll read a list in my closing statement. Is she here? Yes. And I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi.
For 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your leadership. I rise today in strong support for the Respect of Marriage Act, an historic step forward in Democrats' fight to defend the dignity and equality of every American. Let us salute those who have legislated and advocated relentlessly to make this bill the law of the land. Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, Equality Caucus Chair David Cicilline, and all of the members of the Equality Caucus, and the grassroots activists out there, without whose mobilization so many pieces of legislation to expand freedom in our country would not be possible. I say that because when I came to this floor 35 years ago, my first speech on the floor after I was sworn in was to talk about, say that I came here to fight HIV and AIDS. What I learned after that is that we had to fight against discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. Two people who were so significant in that are Phyllis and Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons, champions in our country. Well, I'll talk about that in a moment. First, I want to salute the Senate for its strong bipartisan legislation under leadership of Chuck Schumer and Senator Tammy Baldwin, and the bipartisan strong support that this House gave the legislation to send it over to the Senate. Marriage equality has been law across our country since 2015 and proudly even longer in the state of California. Indeed, my thoughts today are with Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin, two dear friends and iconic trailblazers. I've brought their picture to the floor time and time again to talk about freedom and dignity and respect so many times. Nearly 2 decades ago, their enduring love made history as they joyfully said their vows in San Francisco City Hall, the first. In the years since, the same euphoria has blessed couples and bonded families in every corner of America. And yet, since the Supreme Court's monstrous decision overturning Roe v. Wade, right-wing forces have set their sights on this basic personal freedom. In his concurring opinion, Clarence Thomas explicitly called on the court to reconsider its ruling in Obergefell. While his legal reasoning is twisted and unsound, we must take Justice Thomas at his word and the hateful movement behind him at their word. We must act now on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to combat bigoted extremism and uphold the inviolability of same-sex and interracial marriages. Once signed into law, the Respect for Marriage Act will help prevent right-wing extremists from upending the lives of loving couples, traumatizing kids across the country, and turning back the clock on hard-won progress. This legislation takes several steps to uphold marriage equality under federal law. First, it tears the bigoted, unconstitutional Defense of Marriage Act off the books for good. When that bill was passed, our colleagues understood that it was not constitutional. Why else would they have tried to strip the judicial review of Defense of Marriage Act if they thought it could take the test of judicial review? Today's vote will codify a legal reality already handed down by the Supreme Court and ensure DOMA can never again be used to justify hateful discrimination. Second, the Respect for Marriage Act will enshrine married couples' right to equal protection under federal law, from tax filings to Social Security to bereavement and veterans' benefits. Third, this legislation will require that every state recognizes all valid out-of-state marriages, regardless of any heinous restrictions imposed by particular state law. This legislation is the latest step in House Democrats' fight to win full equality for LGBTQ Americans and forge a more perfect union that our children and their children, all of our children, deserve. Fighting alongside tireless advocates, we transformed the fight against HIV/AIDS here at home and around the world. And I thank President Bush for his leadership in that regard as well. And all of our presidents, well, up until a certain point. We tossed Don't Ask, Don't Tell into the dustbin of history. We enacted fully inclusive federal hate crimes legislation, including Americans from the Scourge of Bigoted Violence with the Matthew Shepard Act. And our friend Barney Frank, our former colleague, is here, was so instrumental in passing that legislation. And today, we will include marriage equality into federal law now and for generations to come. I'm just going to speak personally for a moment because, as I mentioned earlier, my first words on the floor of this House were about fighting against HIV and AIDS and the discrimination that goes with that. My final bill as Speaker the first time, one of the final bills that I signed was the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And now one of the final bills that I will sign in the enrollment will be this beautiful legislation, the Respect for Marriage Act that we are passing today. Today, we stand up for the values the vast majority of Americans hold dear, a belief in the dignity, beauty, and divinity, spark of divinity in every person, an abiding respect for love so powerful that it binds two people together. San Francisco's, when we talk about freedom, I think of Harvey Milk. He once told his supporters, "I have tasted freedom. I will not give up that which I have tasted." Yes, today this chamber proudly stands with forces of freedom, not going back, and justice. Mr. Speaker, I urge a resounding bipartisan aye vote in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act in loving memory of Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons, my dear friends and iconic pioneers, and urge a strong bipartisan vote. I yield back. Thank you.
The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House, and any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of House rules. Gentleman from New York is recognized. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio. Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
We're prepared to close.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge a no vote based on the arguments we have made on the floor today. I think this is, I'm just urging no vote. I think this is the wrong way to go. And with that, we yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate amendment to the Respect for Marriage Act represents a carefully negotiated compromise that maintains all of the bill's substantive protections for marriage equality while affirming that the religious liberty and conscience protections available under current law remain unaffected by the bill. For these reasons, leading national organizations have endorsed the bill as amended by the Senate, including the ACLU, GLAAD, PFLAG, Human Rights Campaign, and Lambda Legal. In addition, a broad interfaith coalition that includes the Interfaith Alliance, the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church USA Office of Public Witness, the Union for Reform Judaism, the Anti-Defamation League, the Hindu American Foundation, Muslims for Progressive Values, and the Sikh Coalition all endorse the Senate amendment to this bill. This is a long overdue bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it with a big vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1510, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. For what purpose? Okay. Oh, Mr. Ray. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We'd ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All members seeking a vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number have arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Kildee, Ms. Axney, and Mr. O'Halloran, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bass of California, I inform the House that Ms. Bass will vote yes on H.404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island again seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member by Mr. Swazi of New York, I inform the House that Mr. Swazi will proudly vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Jacobs of New York, I inform the House Mr. Jacobs vote yea on H.R. 8404.
Gentleman from Texas, for what purposes, gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker Maloney, as the person designated by Mr. Lee Gohmert of the great state of Texas, Ms. Paul Goldsworth of the great state of Arizona, inform the House they will both vote no on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Ruppersberger, I inform the House that Mr. Ruppersberger will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Representative Williams of Georgia, I inform the House that she will vote yea on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Lawson, inform the House that he will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Peter DeFazio, Albio Ceres, Donald Payne, Peter Welch, Dina Titus, Mike Doyle, Eddie Bernice Johnson, and Bill Pascrell, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Lawrence, inform the House that Ms. Lawrence will vote yes on H.R. 8404. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, member designated by Congress members Maureen Newman, Grace Napolitano, Eric Swalwell, Mary Peltola, and Kai Kahili, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana, I inform the House Mr. Baird will vote nay on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated for Ms. Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, I inform the House that Ms. Herrera Butler will vote yea on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, as a member designated by Mr. Huffman, I inform the House that Mr. Huffman will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Meeks, I inform the House that he will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote nay on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Brooks of Alabama, Mr. Long of Missouri, and Mr. Palazzo of Mississippi, I inform the House that all three members will vote nay on H.R. 8404. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Mike Johnson of Louisiana, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote no on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote yea on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Presley, Ms. Hayes, I inform the House that these two members will vote yes on H.R. 8404, and Ms. Beatty as well. Ms. Beatty, Ms. Presley, Ms. Hayes. I thank the Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Mike Simpson of Idaho's 2nd District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Mr. Simpson will vote yes on H.R. 8404. And, Mr. Speaker, also as a member designated by Mr. Johnson of Ohio's 6th District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Mr. Johnson will vote no on H.R. 8404.
Does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Liu, Ms. Wexton, and Mr. Yarmouth, I inform the House that these three members will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of member designated by Mr. Rush, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on H.R. 8404.
On this vote, the yeas are 258, the nays are 169, present 1. The motion is adopted. That was emotional, I'm sorry. That's it.
Is in violation of the rules of the House. For what purpose? Oh, without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. And for what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, I object.
Objection is heard. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
The desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Motor of Colorado moves to reconsider the vote on concurring in the Senate amendment to H.R. 8404.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island moves to lay the motion to reconsider on the table.
The question now occurs on the motion to table. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is not adopted. Gentleman from Texas.
I request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. This 15-minute vote. This is the gentleman from New Jersey rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Peter DeFazio, Albio Series, Donald Payne, Peter Welch, Gina Titus, Mike Doyle, Eddie Bernice Johnson, and Bill Pascrell, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Huffman, I inform the House that Mr. Huffman will vote yes on the motion to table.
What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bass of California, Mr. Swazi of New York, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Meeks, I inform the House that he will vote yes on the motion to table.
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Rush, Ms. Wexton, and Mr. Liu, I inform the House that these three members will vote yes on the motion, putting the motion on the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Beatty, Ms. Presley, and Ms. Hayes, I inform the House that these members will vote yea on the motion to table.
For what purposes the gentleman from New Hampshire rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Kildee of Michigan, Mr. O'Halloran of Arizona, and Ms. Axney of Iowa, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purposes the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote no on the motion.
For what purposes the gentleman from New York rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Jacobs of New York, I inform the House Mr. Jacobs will vote yea on the motion.
For what purposes the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote yea on the motion.
For what purposes the gentlelady from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Lawrence, I inform the House that Ms. Lawrence will vote no on the motion to table.
Gentlelady from Texas.
Yes, I incorrectly stated she votes no. It's a yes vote.
I thank
Ms.
the
Lawrence,
gentlelady.
thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Rupersberger, I inform the House that Mr. Rupersberger will vote yes on the motion to table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated for Ms. Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, I inform the House that Ms. Butler will vote yea on the motion.
What purpose does the gentlelady from South Carolina raise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Nels from Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Nels will vote nay on the motion.
What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congress members Marie Newman, Grace Napolitano, Eric Swalwell, Mary Peltola, and Kai Kahale, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the motion to table.
What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote nay on the motion.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Williams of Georgia, I inform the House that she will vote yea on the motion to table.
What purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Brooks of Alabama, Mr. Long of Missouri and Mr. Palazzo of Mississippi. I inform the House that all three members will vote nay on the motion. Thank you.
Let's vote. The yeas are 206. The nays are 144. The motion. What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Mike Johnson of Louisiana, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote no on the motion to reconsider, to table the motion to reconsider.
What purpose does the gentleman from Idaho rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Mike Simpson of Idaho, pursuant to Resolution 8, Mr. Simpson will vote yes on the motion to table, and as a member designated by Mr. Johnson of Ohio's 6th District, Mr. Johnson will vote no on the motion to table.
Two 18. The nays are 160. The motion is adopted. What purposes, gentleman from California, rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Conway of California, I inform the House that Ms. Conway will vote nay on the motion.
Are 224. The nays are 164. The motion is adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, I would make a motion to adjourn. The NDA should not be voted on suspension.
Question occurs on the motion to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The opinion of the For what purpose? For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Meeks, I inform the House that he will vote no on the motion to adjourn.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania
Madam
rise?
Speaker, as the member designated Mr. Lawson, inform the House that Ms. Lawson votes no.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Williams of Georgia, I inform the House that she will vote nay on the motion to adjourn.
What purpose is the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. Brooks of Alabama, Mr. Palazzo of Mississippi, and Mr. Long of Missouri inform the House that all three members will vote yea on the motion. Thank you.
What purpose is the gentleman from New York rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Jacobs of New York, I inform the House Mr. Jacobs will vote yea on the motion.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote yes on the motion to adjourn.
For from South Carolina rise.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Nels of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Nels will vote yea on the motion.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated for Ms. Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington, I inform the House that Ms. Herrera will vote nay on the motion.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote yea on the motion.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Hayes, Ms. Beatty, and Ms. Presley, I inform the House that these three members will vote no on the motion to adjourn.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, the gentleman from Texas has a designate for Mr. Gomer of Texas and Mr. Gonzalez of Arizona. I inform the House they will both vote yes on the motion to adjourn.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Idaho rise?
Thank you, Madam